Between the Slides, episode 25. I'm your host, Kevin Pinnell. This episode is called The Critical Importance of the Medical Unit. I'm going to talk about an example that myself and my fellow medical unit leader students and then trainees and then qualified medical unit leaders learned about early on in our training. It's a story of Andy Palmer, a young first assignment firefighter in the wildland world that died. He died as a result of bad luck, and as the investigation report would show, is miscommunication and opportunities for much better critical incident within the incident planning. My instructors use this example, and it's been ingrained in my head, and I've translated it to the all hazards incident management world when I was part of the team, to always be thinking, and then what? Andy Palmer graduated high school on June 12, 2008. He graduated basic firefighter training on June 24, 2008. He received his first assignment on July 25, 2008 in Junction, California as part of the Dutch Creek incident. Unfortunately, that day at 13:50, there was a report of man down, and the initial reports were for a broken leg. This was unfortunately Andy, and a 20-inch in diameter tree had been felled and landed on his leg and broke his femur. At 16:30, after some coordination and miscommunication, Andy was finally hoisted onto a helicopter along with some other medical providers from the team. And unfortunately, at 17:10, at the hospital, he was pronounced dead. Many lessons learned from this with communication, team coordination, the critical importance of planning ahead of time, and doing the scouting work as a medical unit leader were impressed upon me in class and in real life as I prepared to help support my team to go look for missing persons, for civil unrest, and any other horrible thing we could think could happen to our people. The medical unit is for us. It's for our teammates, our men and women that wear the badges that we do, or with our partner agencies. It is, in my mind, the most important unit that we can plan for in the entire incident management organization. It is us taking care of us. As a result of this incident, the NWCG put together the Dutch Creek protocols and safety action plans. To their credit, the investigation was thorough, respectful, and very helpful for those of us that live on and did the best that we could to plan for our teams. Medically focused, NWCG's safety action plan includes making sure that we always have the incident within the incident. Our incident management teams are coordinated with our local emergency medical services, that we include air assets in our planning for the medical plan on that incident command system I-206, that we ahead of time establish emergency protocols, that we have a robust medical kit, and that we have robust communication protocols. These very much align with what all hazards medical unit leaders should be able to do, but there are some differences. In the wildland world, medical unit leaders and medical staff, line medics and EMTs, are out in the middle of nowhere at times and have to establish their own medical system. In the all hazards world, we typically have some pretty good infrastructure, but sometimes we don't. So our mindset needs to be that we're going to plan for the worst scenario. In this episode, I'm going to share my Between the Slides 5 that I think are critical and have used and found helpful to support my teammates as a medical unit leader on an all hazards incident management team. The first thing I'll say is that we have to do this for real. We need to staff the unit as needed. We need to ask for resources. We need to have supplies, anything from Sudafed to moleskin to powder to trauma gear to tourniquets to pressure bandages. And we need to be ready on the all hazard side for the types of incidents and injuries that we might see. Like what? Let's say civil unrest, chemicals, bricks to the head, to the body, blunt trauma, shootings. So we may not have to worry about trees being felled, but we certainly have to worry about some pretty traumatic injuries. So my Between the Slides 5 number 1 is if you're assigned as a medical unit leader, do the work, scout everything out, get your supplies, ask for standby resources, and do what you're supposed to do. The second thing I'll say, which I've seen done unfortunately, is that folks have half-assed the medical plan, the ICS 206. I don't mean just the form, I mean the process. And it includes some of the things we talked about in the safety action plan. But that means that I want to know, what are the average flight times of a medical helicopter? Am I using about 120 to 130 miles per hour for the average time? And then mapping where I am, where the hospitals are, and getting real flight times that I am putting on the form from wherever my event or incident is taking place. Are you calling the emergency rooms to those hospitals to make sure that you have a direct line to check on your people or coordinate additional resources? Pick up the phone, call them, say who you are, what team you're with, what you're there to support. Say, is this the best number? Can I call you directly? And do it. It's super easy to do, and it will make sure that your plan is not just looking good, but it is really actionable. Do you have advanced life support or basic life support resources? Verify it, request them as needed, and get that stuff documented. And then, what is your oh shit plan? Do you have a contingency plan if your partner from the law enforcement world gets hit in the head with a brick from some unhappy citizen? How are you going to extract them? Are you going to use rescue task forces for your own people, or are you just going to have them for the public? Do you have a standby medic unit just for your people to scoop them up and get them out of there? Need to work through that and game through it. My third thing is to prepare documents that support the medical unit. So do you have a document that will log the types of calls, so to speak? So let's say you're at an event, a planned event, a bike race or something. Do you have a log of folks that came in with sore throats and you gave them some Cepacol drops, or you gave them some Advil because their joints are sore? Log it, keep record of it. You can know it can help for quality assurance in the future. And it's critically important, reimbursement and that kind of stuff practically as well. Do you have a medical dispensary? Are you authorized to dispense? Are you giving over the counter? Are you not? What level of certification do you have? In the all hazards world, the technical requirement for a medical unit leader qualification is an emergency medical technician basic or above. If you look at FEMA's resource typing for a medical unit, it's for a type 2, it's a paramedic, and for a type 1, it's a physician. In the wildland world, it's EMT and above. So there's some disparity there. So know, again, who can dispense what and what medicines you have, what's in your kit, and what is your pre-deployment screening method. Do you have a form that checks folks' pre-existing conditions? Do you keep a health record on them? If not, that's good to know. You need to know if folks are diabetic, or do they have a heart condition, or some mobility issues, or whatever's going on, so that when you go to deploy to, even though we're all hazards, there's plenty of places we go for the missing persons that are kind of out there, that you already have an idea of their medical history. So if you have to coordinate with 911 or with your resources or your dedicated resources, that you can give and help with that medical history immediately. So kind of mid-recap, do this for real is my number one between the slides 5 for the criticality of the all hazards medical unit. Don't half-ass that medical plan. Make sure all those elements are real data, not guesstimates. Do the math. It's pretty easy to figure out how long it takes to drive somewhere, or use that average 120 to 130 flight time, ALS, BLS, aid stations, all that stuff. What radio channels do you have? And then the third thing, have some documents that aren't necessarily the official ICS documents, but a patient assessment form, call logs, pre-deployment screenings. And in the all hazards world, some of those forms may be a mix of, I'm going to use my mobile data terminal, my MDT, to do an assessment because that's the protocol for the agency you work with. But know that and make sure that everybody else knows that. My fourth thing is coordinate contingencies, right? So this speaks to that incident within the incident plan that is part of the safety action plan from NWCG. For the all hazards world, we should, and I know there's a huge disparity between where you are and what agency you're with and what stuff you've had or training you've done or not. We should all be trained in the TECC or TCCC, TCCC, if you will, that tactical combat casualty care or tactical emergency casualty care, particularly for shootings, stabbings, basically mass traumas, where the gist of it is stop the bleed, get them to a hospital as fast as you can, and you're working triage. You're ingrained in that as the medical unit leader. Your staff are. You can provide some of that essential training to even non-medical personnel, but we need to have that particularly for contingencies. So how are we going to evacuate? What are the locations we're going to use for evacuation? And what are the protocols? Do you start triage or salt triage? Work all that stuff out ahead of time. Are you going to use a 9-line kind of military thing to call in? Or are you going to basically give report like we do in the all hazards world? Again, have that in the explanation piece of the 206 down at the bottom, so it is very well spelled out. I mentioned the rescue task force piece. So that is typically a couple of EMS folks, either EMTs or medics, with law enforcement security. So let's go back to that scenario I mentioned. One of your folks gets hit with a brick during a civil unrest. They're down. We need to get in there, get them out, or we need to have the folks with the shields and the heavy kind of equipment on them to extract them. What point are they going to take them to? What channel are they going to be on? How are we going to know that? Don't make it a cluster so we don't know and we can't get to them. And let's, honor the lessons learned from Andy Palmer in the all hazards world, and let's get our people out of there in time so we can stop the bleed, so we can get them to a higher level of care. That's the key, so they don't end up staying there on the street. The fifth thing, which is really what I've seen a lot of, and fortunately in the area I'm in, and I speak highly of that typically in these broadcasts because, again, we've done a pretty good job of it, is don't rely on resources from operations, right? So as a reminder for folks that are in the incident management world, listen to this, operations is for the public. So the medic units, we have the bike teams, the EMS bike teams, police bike teams, that's all focused outward on the public. The medical unit that lives in the logistics section is for our people. So, if you don't have extra resources, could you fall back and use the medic unit to get your own people to the hospital or that law enforcement officer? Yes. But why not have your own medical unit or your own medic unit or aid station just for your folks to go to? It is critically important. You have the asset, and the best case scenario is that you request and you have a medic unit on standby and they do absolutely nothing. That's our goal. Have a bunch of plans, do a bunch of planning, have dedicated resources, and have them be bored. Because the alternative is that we have a lot of business because we're taking care of our own folks that are getting hurt out there. And that's not something we want. But if you're a medical unit leader in the all hazards world and the wildland world, but particularly that's what I speak to is the all hazards world, you need to, for sure, ask for resources and have them dedicated. And again, if you're hanging out and you're just, when you're on standby doing training, you're making sure you're monitoring what's going on, you're synced in with operations so that they can know or they can tell you that someone's down. That's a great relationship to have that you need to have. And we need to really, again, have our own equipment, have our own people, have our resources, have that contingency channel. Hey, we're all going to switch to this channel, or we're going to have the incident communication center switch everyone else to another channel, work all that stuff out, but really do it ahead of time. So for me as an all hazards medical unit leader, again, do it for real. Game it all out, measure everything out. Make sure that you've filled for the second thing. Make sure you've filled the medical plan out to a T. You've worked closely with safety who's going to sign off on that plan, that you fill out all the boxes with real data. And a tip to do, which is helpful, is you can pre-populate essentially if you're in an area where you have all your hospitals, you know where they are, you know whether they have burn units, you know whether they have helipads, you know kind of the distance. Generally, you can alter a little bit depending on where you're operating in your area because, again, we're all hazards, so we're not necessarily going to be operating in the middle of the woods in someone else's, state across the country. This is going to be in your backyard, in your region, so you're going to be familiar with it. So you can have templated things and then just update if you're deployed for a special event or an incident in your area, update the location a bit based on where you're going to be, or, pregame this and do this for other places you go to in your state or region. But definitely fill them out and do that appropriately. Third thing, get those documents ready. Get the non-ICS 206 documents. How do I screen my teammates to make sure they're healthy? How am I documenting that? And again, there's HIPAA and there's other things, but your teammates are using it for official care. You're a healthcare provider, so have good document control for that as well. Keep a note of the dispensary that you give, the treatments that you provide, so you can then do some kind of preventative medicine. It to me was a natural thing. I was a corpsman in the Navy, so shout out to my fellow corpsmen and my brother and sister medics in the other services. The medical unit in the all hazards world is kind of a natural fit, right? You'll do anything from, like I mentioned before, give an Advil, powder, moleskin, or actual, splitting things, people twist an ankle, whatever, or hopefully, God forbid, something like happened to Andy, and you're actually working a big trauma. Fourth thing, which is critical, make sure that you ahead of time plan out the contingency plan with all the resources that you have dedicated, with all the communications unit and everybody else. And the fifth thing is don't rely on operations resources. Ask for your own dedicated resources. We owe it to our people to make sure that we are dedicating the time, the effort, the communications, and the stuff. And so, I think you get it, folks. And again, thanks for coming back to Between the Slides and listening, going to betweentheslides.com, listening on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, etc. At PSC to PMP on Instagram and Twitter, PSC to PMP on the Facebooks. And I really appreciate you listening. For all my incident management team folks that are out there getting ready to deploy, got their go bags ready. Godspeed to you, brothers and sisters. For all the other folks that stayed and listened that aren't necessarily in the incident command or emergency management world, maybe some of my project management folks, thank you. This is an area obviously I'm passionate about, and we all should be, right? Again, the medical unit is critical because it's for our people. So thank you for listening, following on Instagram, etc., and Godspeed.